Stop before you sign that lease on your new roastery. Because the industry is lying to you about profitability. That beautiful aesthetic, the reclaimed wood counters, the single origin pour-over bar, the perfectly lit Instagram corner, that's hiding a nightmare of debt and unsustainable overhead that most creators won't survive. We are breaking down the terrifying math that makes specialty coffee a literal financial suicide mission. And I want to be upfront about something before we get into the numbers. This isn't a video about bad coffee, or bad taste, or bad branding. Almost nobody fails at this because their espresso is mediocre. They fail because the business itself was mathematically unsurvivable before they ever pulled their first shot. So let's actually build the model. Real numbers, real percentages, real dollars, not vague warnings. Let's model an actual specialty coffee shop. A solid, well-located, reasonably successful independent shop doing $600,000 in annual revenue. Not a struggling shop, a good one. This is what making it looks like on paper, before we even get to the part where things go wrong. Start with cost of goods sold. Your beans. Your milk, your cups, lids, sleeves, syrups, and whatever food you're selling alongside the coffee. For a specialty shop sourcing quality single origin beans, not the cheapest commodity coffee, that number typically runs 28 to 30% of revenue. On $600,000, that's somewhere around $170,000 gone before you've paid a single employee or a single dollar of rent. Now labor. This is usually the single largest line item in the entire business. Baristas, shift leads, a manager if you have one, payroll taxes, workers' comp, maybe benefits if you're trying to retain good people in an industry with brutal turnover. For a shop this size, you're looking at 30 to 35% of revenue. Let's say 32%. That's roughly $192,000. Add those two together, cost of goods and labor, and you're already at 60% of revenue gone. And we haven't touched rent yet. Rent is where the aesthetic trap really starts to bite. The conventional wisdom in food and beverage is that rent should sit around 8 to 10% of revenue for the business to be healthy. But specialty coffee doesn't get to play by that rule, because the entire business model depends on foot traffic and a specific kind of neighborhood. Walkable, trendy, high visibility. Those locations don't rent for 8% of revenue. They rent for 12, 15, sometimes 18%, because you're not just paying for square footage. You're paying for the exact kind of exposure your business model requires to exist at all. Let's be conservative and say 12%. That's $72,000 a year. Now the stuff that doesn't show up in anyone's daydream about opening a coffee shop. Utilities, insurance, credit card processing fees running 2.5 to 3% of every transaction, marketing, point of sale software, routine maintenance, pest control, all of it. Call it 10% of revenue. $60,000. And then there's the equipment. A commercial espresso machine alone can run $15,000 to $30,000. Add a grinder, a water filtration system, a POS setup, furniture, build-out costs that easily hit $200,000 or more before you've sold a single latte. Almost nobody pays that in cash. It's financed. And that debt service, the monthly loan payment on all of that equipment and build-out, typically runs another 5% of revenue. $30,000 a year, just to service the debt on the thing that makes the coffee. Add it all up. Cost of goods, 29%. Labor, 32%. Rent, 12%. Operating expenses, 10%. Debt service, 5%. That's 88% of your revenue gone in a genuinely well-run shop with no major disasters. That leaves 12%. And if that were the real number, this would be a completely different video. But that 12% is the optimistic version, before you account for the owner's own labor. Because in almost every one of these shops, the owner is working 60-hour weeks and not paying themselves anything close to a market wage. Which means that 12% is partially made of unpaid labor that isn't actually profit. It's just you not getting paid. Price in a reasonable owner's salary. Price in the reality that most shops don't land the optimistic end of every single one of those ranges simultaneously. And the 12% compresses down to the number the entire industry actually reports, 2 to 5% net margin. On $600,000 in revenue, a 5% margin is $30,000 a year. A 2% margin is $12,000 a year. That is the entire annual reward for a year of 60-hour weeks for successfully running a well-located, well-reviewed, busy coffee shop. Now let's talk about what happens when something goes wrong. Because on a margin this thin, something going wrong isn't a possibility. It's a certainty on a timeline. That espresso machine we talked about, the one that costs $15,000 to $30,000 to buy, doesn't just sit there working forever. A major component failure, a boiler issue, a pump replacement can run you $3,000 to $8,000 in a single repair. On a shop netting $12,000 to $30,000 a year, one bad repair bill can erase 10 to 60% of your entire annual profit in a single afternoon. Not your revenue, your profit. The thing you were supposed to take home for the whole year. Staffing turnover hits the same way. The coffee industry has some of the highest turnover rates of any service business, commonly cited north of 60% annually. Every time a trained barista leaves, you're paying to recruit, hire, and train a replacement, while running short-staffed or paying overtime to cover the gap, typically for 2 to 4 weeks. That's not a line item anyone budgets for separately. It just quietly eats into that same thin margin, beat by beat all year long. And foot traffic. A 5% dip in daily customers, from a rainy season, from a new competitor opening 2 blocks away, from a viral shop stealing your Saturday morning crowd, doesn't cost you 5% of your profit, because your costs are mostly fixed. Rent doesn't drop, basis staffing doesn't drop, debt service doesn't drop. A 5% revenue dip can easily wipe out 50 to 100% of a margin that was already sitting at 2 to 5%. There's no cushion, there's no room. The math was built with 0 shock absorbers. And shocks are not optional in this industry. They are guaranteed to happen. We just don't know exactly which one hits first. This is where the theoretical math turns into real closures. The specialty coffee industry is currently seeing a record wave of liquidations. And when you trace the actual timeline on most of these failures, there's a pattern. Founder savings get exhausted almost exactly around the 1-year mark. Here's what that timeline looks like in dollars. Most new shops don't hit their modeled 12%, let alone the real 2 to 5% net, in year 1. They're still building a customer base, still working out staffing, still absorbing the unexpected costs that always show up in year 1. A common pattern is a shop running at a loss of $2,000 to $4,000 a month through that first year, while the owner treats it as a temporary ramp-up problem rather than the business's actual structural reality. Now put a number on the savings most people open with. Let's say a founder put in $50,000 to $75,000 of their own cash as a cushion beyond the initial build-out. Money meant to cover them through the slow ramp-up period. At a burn rate of $3,000 a month, that cushion lasts 16 to 25 months. Add in that most shops underestimate their true burn rate by 20 to 30% once you account for all the surprise costs we just walked through. The equipment repair, the staffing gap, the slow month, and that runway compresses down to somewhere around 12 to 18 months. That's the 1-year mark. It's not a coincidence, and it's not really about coffee specifically. It's what happens to any business modeled on a 2 to 5% margin, colliding with the real-world volatility of equipment, staffing, and foot traffic, for exactly as long as the owner's personal savings can absorb the difference. The business's own revenue was never the runway. The owner's bank account was the runway. And once that hits 0, there is nothing underneath the business to catch it. So here's where this actually lands. Passion is no longer a hedge against the brutal economic math of the mid-2020s coffee market. That's not a knock on anyone's ambition, or taste, or work ethic. It's a statement about what passion can and cannot do financially. Passion can get you through a 60-hour week. It can get you through a slow Tuesday. What it cannot do is manufacture margin that doesn't exist in the underlying economics of the business. You cannot out-hustle a 5% margin on $600,000 of revenue. You cannot want it badly enough to make the espresso machine not break, or the rent not come due, or a trained barista not quit at the worst possible moment. The uncomfortable truth is that the aesthetic, the exact thing that makes specialty coffee so appealing to open in the first place, is also the thing hiding how unsustainable the underlying business actually is. A beautiful shop with a loyal following and a devastating balance sheet can absolutely coexist. right up until the moment the savings account hits zero, and there's nothing left to paper over the gap. If you're looking at a lease right now, or you've already signed one, this is the math you need to run before anything else. Not, will people like my coffee, but what happens to this business the very first time something goes wrong? Because on a margin this thin, something going wrong isn't a possibility. It's a certainty on a timeline. And if the answer to that question is that you don't have an honest one, that's worth sitting with before you sign anything else. If you're in this right now, or thinking about getting in, I want to hear where you land. Drop it in the comments. And if you want the follow-up on what a specialty coffee business would actually need to look like structurally to survive past that 1 year mark, let me know, because the model isn't impossible. It's just not the model most people are opening.